Me.
Good evening and welcome to the board meeting this evening. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll begin with a call to order. Mrs. Perry?
Dr. McBride?
Here.
Mr. Perez?
Here.
Dr. Gase?
Here.
Mr. Kizabeth?
Here.
Mr. Williams?
Here.
Are there any additions or amendments to the agenda?
We do have a correction on page 8, and that is action item 7.08 to approve an administrator contract. The dates, instead of August 1st, 2022 through July 31st, 2023 for Michelle Tuitt as the Director of Parent and Community Partnerships, should end July 31st, 2025. She is on a 3-year contract.
Thank you. So I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda with the correction.
You first? Got it. Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry?
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Kizabeth?
Yes.
Dr. Gase?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Dr. McBride?
Yes. This time we'll turn it over to Mr. Richards and our presentation.
With no further ado, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Tricia Flint and Dusty for a quick presentation here.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Tricia Flint, and I am the school counselor at Noble. Thank you for allowing us to be here tonight to introduce Dusty. He is the guest of honor here. He is our new school facility dog. So he is 2 years old, just turned 2 in July. He's a black lab, and he just graduated from the Ability Center a few weeks ago. So he's official now. He will be working with me at Noble as Kennedy's successor dog. Dusty, down. Yeah, boy. Distractions, sorry. So he will be working with me at Noble as Kennedy's successor dog. He's extremely happy to be here today and just in general, as you can tell by his tail that never stops wagging, and the kids love him already. You all know Cooper, who is here to support us this evening with Melissa Malott. They both work at the middle school here. And I want to also introduce Jet very briefly. He's the other black lab back here. He is Dusty's brother, and he is in training to be a school facility dog with Jill Miller. So he's working district-wide. So all of these dogs are trained by the Ability Center of Toledo. And as I said, Dusty just graduated a couple of weeks ago. And we want to thank the elementary PTO for funding his placement to Tiffin City Schools. And thanks to Mike Newlove for all of the support as well. Megan Auble, Kim Hyman, and I spent 5 days with Dusty at the Ability Center to become his trained handlers this summer. Melissa, Jill, and I all participated in research over the past year to establish guidelines for school facility dogs. This prompted the change in the title from what we knew as school therapy dogs to now school facility dogs. It just better encompasses all the work and training they hold. So we plan to share a draft of how we feel the guidelines would be best implemented in our district in the future with you. So that is all I have. Thanks again for supporting us and our dogs this evening and having us here. Do you guys have any questions?
How have their first few days back gone?
Wonderful. They love it. I think Dusty was so excited even back to school night. He was like, the kids are here, the kids are here. So it's been very, very well. Lots of naps too, because they're getting back into the swing of things.
Having had the opportunity to see some of the research and see some of the findings of the work y'all have done, being able to have so many in the district is a huge benefit, but it's also a huge commitment on each of your parts. So thank you for that.
Yes, thank you for allowing us to. Thanks.
This will bring us to reports for this evening, and we will begin with Dr. Gase.
The Business Advisory Council has not met this month yet. We'll be meeting this Thursday at 8 a.m. at the Mercy Hospital, Macaulay Room.
Thank you. Mr. Perez.
Briefly, I will say that I welcome Mr. Richards. I was glad to see him at this meeting. He was there before I was, though, because I had to run in late because can't remember exactly why court or something, but Dustin took over dutifully for me, and as he's part of the committee, so he's going to report out. Thank you. Oh, okay. I guess he's not. But basically, we went over the finances as always, and I think we had a discussion against on the philosophy and purpose of the committee again. We had it a couple years ago, and I think Mr. Richards opened up that discussion again to see what the purpose of the committee was. And I'm glad to see, and I think we'll follow up on that to see what role we're going to play in terms of not just monitoring the finances of the districts, but how the district's finances meet into the purpose or the strategic plan of the district once we have it formed.
Next up is meet with support services. So support services met on April 18th. No, not April 18th. We met on August 12th. We got to meet the new food service supervisor, Colleen Neely, which is an incredible addition to our district. We also worked with Tim, and Tim presented a chart and led discussion regarding Chromebooks that weren't returned and working on the policies on having abilities to get Chromebooks back, but also abilities to have some accountability around that. Randy with transportation, there's a number of issues that were discussed. Some of those are selling older buses. We want to not have to be responsible for maintenance or insurance on those. So buses that will be out of commission for us, one will be sold to Calvert, another would be traded in for a new bus. And we also looked at the updated routes for this school year. And we're looking at timing issues regarding kindergarten registration and getting routes around. So that's something that Mr. Richards and Randy are taking up to continue discussions around. Mr. Daniels gave his report regarding operations. There was a dye test completed over at, is that Washington? Washington. And looking at some of the separation project, the city sewer separation project. Luckily, none of that work needs to be done in the school. We do have a new flagpole coming. However, due to supply chain, it will not be here until October. And Columbian's roof is being repaired by JB Roofing. We've seen the folks out there working on that. And our next meeting will be September 16th in the admin building. Personnel services, or personnel committee is myself. That did not meet this month, neither did records. So that brings us next to Mr. Perez.
The legislative liaison report for today is basically the legislature is in its summer recess at this point. There are actually some Senate committees that might be meeting next week or in the first week, but the House isn't really meeting at this point. I think last time we did discuss the dyslexia guidelines that we have to meet now as a district. And then if Mr. Richards, I don't think I've approached on this, it does, the legislation that goes into effect now also allows us to adopt our own standards on substitutes for the next 2 years because of, it carries over the pandemic thing. So I know I've had questions on that, if we actually have a change in policy on that. But other than that, that's our just legislative report.
And then our last two are over to Mr. Williams.
Oh. All right, for student achievement, I don't have anything to report this month, but we will have some discussions with Mr. Richards as we look into the Capitol Conference and some potential things to take there. For policy and governance, we did not meet in August, but we did have some discussions with Mr. Richards as part of the Finance Committee and some ideas on the different ways that committees can work together, right, and get more work done in committee and less in the physical board meeting and kind of report back. So there was some committee work done, even though it wasn't directly related. The next policy committee meeting is on September 8th. We typically meet the first Thursday of the month, but that is the first of the month, and our treasurer is not able to attend at that time. So we move it to the second of the month in that case.
Thank you. So now we get to have our superintendent's reports and recommendations for the first time from our new superintendent, who we're thrilled to have here tonight and thrilled to have in the district.
Thank you, Dr. McBride, and I'm very happy to be here. And when we talk about the beginning of the school year, I think relatively, and it's always risky to talk about this when we don't have a full week under our belts, but so far the school year has gone fairly well. I don't want to jinx it more than that. It's gone okay. We've picked up kids. We've made sure kids are fed. We greet kids with a smile, and we've gotten kids home safely. Now we need to make sure we're also really educating them while they're here as well. But I'd like to thank all of the staff that have put in a ton of hours to make certain that that's gone off without a hitch. Our teachers, our support staff, our administration. I think everybody has worked together as a team to make certain that we can have a wonderful beginning of the school year. The next item up is the first reading of updated board policy. As Mr. Williams alluded to, and Dr. McBride, you alluded to as well with support services, this has been a policy that the policy committee has worked with technology on, with Mr. Weber, so that we can address some of the technology needs. And this is just updating the policy. So making sure that we read through that. Does anybody have any questions about that policy, just as we have a first reading of that policy? And if so, I might defer those questions to Mr. Weber or Mr. Williams as they sat on that committee and have a bit more knowledge about it than I do. But I believe this has been communicated that we're trying to update this policy. The next part about it is just a discussion of Chromebook insurance and user agreements. In talking to Mr. Weber, there was a group, and I believe Mr. Kisbeth, you're on that as well, along with Mr. Williams, that we want to make certain that we do have personal responsibility for the Chromebook devices. And unfortunately, while a lot of our kids have treated Chromebooks very well, we do have, like any organization, we have some kids that haven't taken care of those as well. And that ultimately falls back onto the district and our taxpayers. I think there was talk about putting in like a warranty fee for the use of those Chromebooks. But at this stage of the game, I don't think it would be prudent for us to be able to assess that to parents without having that been clearly communicated to them well in advance. I don't think parents going to bed tonight thinking there's no fee and then waking up tomorrow and finding out there's a fee for something, I don't think is the right way for us to do business. And in talking with Mr. Weber, I think he's been supportive of that as well. He's back there somewhere. There he is. I think Mr. Weber is supportive of that as well, along with our administrative team. We just want to make certain that if we are making changes to parents that are going to affect them, that we give them a leeway and a runway to be prepared for that. Additional items, and I'd like to just say this, and I would imagine that the board would echo this. There's been a decent amount of transition, and I know you guys have gone through this, and hopefully, I'll knock on wood that hopefully we don't have as much transition out of my position. That would be very sad for me. But there's someone that has always kind of stepped up when the board has asked them to, and that's Mr. Bose. And so just in public, I'd like to be able to thank Mr. Bose for all the work that he's done in these transitions and being that steady rock that the district can always count upon during these times. Hopefully, Mr. Bose, you won't have to do that in the near future. I sincerely hope for that, but I do appreciate the work that he's done along with so many people that have pitched in those moments of transition. And finally, we do need to be able to select student board members. We have not done that for this coming year. I hesitate to call this a recommendation. It would be my opinion that we try to select just a few board members, student board members. My take would be, and it's just an opinion, is that we use the teaching staff at the high school to make recommendations on who would be the best members. We look for who gets the most votes for that, and then we send that to the students to be able to vote off of that list for who would actually represent them with the board. I think the teaching staff at the school would have pretty good knowledge about the types of students that we are looking for to give different opinions and different voices. And so I would trust the staff at the high school, along with the support of Mr. Alvarado, to be able to lead that process. And then we could work on selection from the student body from that point. But I open any of those things that I've set up to any questions or comments from the board.
So I want to start with an echo and thank Mr. Bose for his work. Mr. Bose, Ms. Kuhn, the entire central office staff have all been incredible. We're very grateful, thankful for all that you have done. As for student board members, I concur. I think that having a mixture of teachers' recommendations partnered with student body votes is a great approach.
I know we had 4 previously. I'm not sure how many were on the board before that. How did we choose those 4?
It
It's
is very.
Just presidential prerogative, I think, at that point. So,
The president and somebody else interviewed those who applied.
So there was an application process.
Right,
Okay,
right.
all right, fair enough.
They had to write an essay and give it a CV and a picture and all that. Yep.
and I think that's what's good about one of his recommendations is it teaches them to utilize faculty and staff because that's a skill they're going to need to go beyond high school, that they learn to make those connections later on. So, but I think 4, we've got to get that number down. We did the 4 during the pandemic, 1 per quarter, because we had 4 applicants. So I think that was Mr. Trissler's idea. But I think you also discussed maybe changing the terms to 2 years. So like in most organizations, they have it. So there's success, overlap. And so it would require a bigger commitment, I think, what you've been discussing.
My preference would be to say, my opinion would be to have a senior and a current junior, and the junior would serve a 2-year term, and then every year we just select a new junior to be on the board. So that way we have a little bit more continuity with those students. And I also have some fun, exciting ways. I can talk to Mr. Alvarado about other things that we might involve these students in doing. I think it'd be great for these students to be able to attend our Business Advisory Council. I think that'd be great to be able to hear their perspectives about how we work with some things. So I have some thoughts about how we can also make sure we utilize these students more effectively to capture their voice.
I have to disagree with what's been said so far. I think last year was perfect. I think we had 4 excellent students, and they were all very good candidates, and that's why we chose 4. They all contributed and all learned something in the process. So I disagree. I think it's better than it was 8, 9 years ago. I remember interviewing a student who said the previous board president told her, "Well, we just want you to. You don't have to do anything. We just want you to sit there." And she was like, "Yeah, that's how the previous student reps done." But I think we've done a great job with our student reps. So I don't disagree with having a junior. I think that's not a bad idea. But I don't think having an extra student or 2 up here was cumbersome or troubling. I don't think so.
And I do agree. We definitely had phenomenal reps. And we've always had phenomenal reps, at least in my experience. I definitely like the idea of continuity, a junior and a senior, and having the teacher and the student body input.
Well, what about as kind of a compromise? Typically, when you see elections, there's kind of a natural cutoff that somewhat occurs, that if we don't limit ourselves to a number, but we kind of look for wherever that natural break is in the vote, so that we're not setting an artificial number or a predetermined number. We're looking for where there's a kind of just a natural break, so to speak, just as an idea.
I think it's a board decision. I think it's our decision to make. And we choose the student reps. I don't think teachers choose them. I think we should. It's our decision, not teachers. It's our board, right? We were elected, and I don't think we should have anybody appointed for this
And
position.
I think that's a great point, that we were elected by those that we represent, and that, we have a
It's our board.
Yes, and we
Yeah.
have a disadvantage that we don't know all of the students. So I think having those students brought forward by their community, just as we were brought forward by our community, and so having teachers make recommendations and having their peers vote makes it really mirror our process, because we were voted in by our community, so the community at large, having students brought in by their community. I think that best mirrors and parallels what we're doing here.
I think beyond how we select them and how many there should be, I think coming into the board new, it wasn't clear to me how they were intended to serve the board. right? Or what their intended role was, right? So it was good to hear their input on things, but I wasn't ever certain what the responsibilities were, or what our expected contribution to their growth was, right? So I think for me, beyond the selection of them and how many there should be, I think we need to be a lot more clear about why they're here and what what our expectations of them are, and how we intend to purpose them, right? They're not here to just to sit and listen. There should be a reason that they're here, and I think we need to be a lot more clear about that.
Once again, we were the last year was the best year ever because we had assignments, buildings. We had, Mr. Widman had, what's his name, Gunther attend the committee, the board meetings of the Vanguard Sentinel and give a report. I think, what's his name, Mike's son, Cole Newlove, he did a fabulous job. I think everybody did a fabulous job. I really think last year there was better assignments and not unreasonable ones. I mean, years ago, when we put them in the program committee, and they would sit there for 2 hours, and it was terrible. There was no value to that. But I think I thought all the students represented themselves very well.
Well, I think one of the issues you asked is what their roles have been. When I first got on, I think it was, I don't know if it was purposeful, but there was a boy and a girl. And it was, I think at that point it was Turco and it was Miss Egbert. And she took it really aggressively and made herself part of the committee and got us to readopt the newspaper, if we remember that, and brought that back. Then we had Andrew Branson in the next class with, I can't remember his name right now, really good kid though. But we brought him into the discussion on fees, and it was kind of weird because he wanted to report out what the students wanted to do, but then also wanted to be responsive to the board. Then we had the pandemic year, and in that one, Mr. Trissler was, there's 4 applicants. They're all really good at this point, and they could each take a different quarter to mirror their sport so that they're not overdoing it on themselves. So that was it done in consideration to them.
But I want to come back to what Mr. Williams said. Like, what was the charge, or that I haven't been a part of the application process. Like, what is the charge to them?
But that was one of the discussions we've always had in terms of trying to define what their role was, is trying to, okay, if you're coming to the meeting and are you here just to report what's happening in your classes, or are you here to report in terms of a representative on the student body? And we've never delineated with that role. I kind of want to see them personally as somebody that reports and advocates for their school building, which is always why I've had an issue with them being appointed by the board in terms of it gives them less, it's not that they're being endorsed by their students to come here and act as their voice. They're kind of responsible because we put them there, versus they have the independence of coming here going, no, I am the representative of the student body, and the issues that are important to the student bodies are the ones that I'll report onto the board. But we've never had policy or exact defined roles as what they do. Last year, you were correct. With the year, everybody got a committee meeting. Mr. Shawberry went to finance. Mr. Newlove was here all the time. Annalise was especially here, but they did do a lot of activities too. They're doing musical, they're doing cross country, and then they're coming here at the same time. So I think we have to be mindful of that too as well, that these are good students and we don't want to push them either to, do stuff here too. So we want to be mindful of that. But I think I'd rather see board members who come in with a defined role that they're to represent their student body, tell us what's important to them, have input in our discussions where it's applicable, but also, that we can ask them questions. And we have used them as sounding boards in the past.
So it sounds like we need to clearly delineate what their roles and their charge is and what we want them here for, so that they're not a placeholder. We're not just having them come and sit, but are they reporting out what's happening in the schools? Are they advocates for their school community? I think we need to clearly define that charge. It sounds like a policy, Mr. Williams.
I tend to agree with Dustin. Being a new board member and serving in other capacities, I think they do need to have a defined purpose. What is their role in coming? Because we know they don't vote, but I think they could be a great sounding board. But I do think for interested students to come in, they have to know why they're coming in and what roles they're going to fulfill. So I think that's really important to get a job description.
Agreed.
do you want to refer it then to the policy committee? But I think he's going to need action on it this year, so, or
Any other pieces, Mr. Richards? Wonderful. That brings us to item 5 on the agenda, which is the opportunity for the public to address the board. Per the policy, each person addressing the board shall give their name and address. If several people wish to speak, each person is allotted 3 minutes for a total of 30 minutes.
It's on now. Good evening. My name is Mark Stover. I live at 1955 East County Road 36, Tiffin. Hopefully everyone is glad to be back and in action and looking forward to the school year. It has to be better than the COVID years. I would like to comment on the opening day convocation for the teachers and staff, which was hosted on Tuesday of last week. Our new superintendent, Mr. Richards, stated he planned on visiting every school and meeting every staff member. That is super. For that has not happened with our superintendent since Don Coletta. For the past several years, the superintendents were selective when it came to visiting the rooms, and that should not be. On the other hand, our interim superintendents did a good job with visiting all the classrooms as far as I know. And I would like to thank, once again, you get some more thanks, Mr. Bowles, for stopping in the Kraut Library when he visits, talking with my wife, who is a Kraut librarian, and asking how our family is doing. That's actually what Mr. Coletta did, and he knew the names of myself and our kids. Now, I will not expect Mr. Richards to remember names, even though that would be amazing. But I will encourage him to keep his plans of visiting every school and meeting all the staff. That will be a great start. Now, the other thing I would like to do tonight is to honor a retiring, longtime library volunteer. We usually recognize people for accomplishments, promotions, retirements, but we seldom recognize volunteers. And these people who are not compensated for what they do. I would like to venture to say that there are few, if any, here tonight who know this volunteer, for she came, did her job, and left. No fanfare. Her name is Lorene Roberts. Let me tell you a few things about her. She grew up on a farm in Nevada, Ohio, and she and her husband lived in California, where she taught elementary education. When they retired, they moved back to Nevada, and having no kids, this way they were close to family. My wife has no idea how Mrs. Roberts ended up becoming a library volunteer, but she got her start at Lincoln somewhere around 2005, assisting my wife one day a week. From there, she followed my wife to Kraut Library. When our schools restructured in 2011, Teresa was bumped from her library job, and for 5 years, Mrs. Roberts did not volunteer in Tiffin City Schools. She always told Teresa to let her know when she got another library position. Fortunately for both of them, that happened in 2016. She volunteered 2.5 to 3 hours once a week for over 10 years, with many of those years also taking care of a sick husband, driving to Cleveland Clinic, etc., etc. From her home in Nevada to Kraut is 20 miles, so she drove 40 miles a week to volunteer at a school district that she had no ties to other than loving library work and now knowing my wife. Doing some quick math, and you're going to have to trust me on this, she volunteered in the library for nearly 1,000 hours. She traveled at least, get this, 14,000 miles. And she spent at least 300 hours in her car traveling to do so. Wow, is all I can say. How many of us would even consider volunteering until we are into our 80s, and most of us live close and have ties to our schools. My wife is so thankful for Lorene and her faithfulness and dedication in volunteering, and so am I. I believe that deserves some recognition. Now I'd like to read a short letter Mrs. Roberts wrote to my wife on August 1st. Dear Teresa, since it is August 1st, I figure you are thinking about school. So was I, but unfortunately, I cannot continue helping. I have been ill since the middle of June and have learned I have a liver problem, which has decreased my stamina and energy. I am certain you will find another, but probably not someone with the same love of the job. I always said I should have been a librarian. All the best in the future, and give my regards to your dear husband, Mark. I loved working with all you these years. As ever, Lorene. If anyone would like to send her a card or anything, I have her address. I have cards here. Or you can email Teresa Stover at Kraut School. I'm sure she'd appreciate it. She doesn't like, she definitely was a back of the scenes, but you know what? This lady deserves it. So I thank you for your time, consideration. And as you see, I have a cross-country carnival shirt. I don't know if anyone in here has never been there. Probably not. Oh, you have to go. It is a spectacle. Have a great week, everyone.
September 10th, right?
September 10th, yes.
Yep.
All day long.
Thank you, Mr. Stover. At this point, that brings us to the consent agenda. I will read the headers and then entertain a motion. So 6.01, approve the minutes from July regular board meeting. 02, approve the treasurer's report for July. 03, employment. That goes on to page 5. So 6.4, statement of purpose budget reports. 6.05, stipends. 6.06, employment. Nope, 6.06 we're going to hold out. So 6.01 through 6.06. Entertain a motion.
Through 6.05.
Yeah.
Correct.
Through 5. 6 is held out. We'll do that one next.
So move to adopt the consent agenda.
Second.
Any discussion? Mrs. Perry?
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Dr. Gase?
Yes.
Mr. Kizabeth?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Dr. McBride?
Yes. That brings us to 6.06 of the consent agenda with employment. Entertain a motion.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Any discussion?
I assume that this is so she can cover both areas.
It is so that she can cover both areas, but also it's pulled out so that
I understand why it's pulled out, but I'm assuming she's being hired as a substitute teacher and a substitute educational aide so that she can serve in either or position.
Mr. Bose says yes. Any other discussion? Mrs. Perry?
Mr. Kizabeth?
Yes.
Mr. Williams? Oh, I'm sorry. Who seconded that motion? I marked that wrong. That can't be
I
right.
can be Mr. Williams.
I
for today.
apologize.
Yes.
Mr. Perez? Thank you. Dr. Gase?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Abstain.
Dr. McBride?
Yes. Thank you all. This brings us to our action items. 7.01, approve bus routes for the 2022-2023 school year.
Obviously, this is not the ideal situation since we've already had 3 days of school. That'll be something, as Dr. McBride alluded to, and that'll be the same for 702. We're going to have to talk about with kindergarten registration. It's just pushed all of our processes back. So this is not a lack of preparation by the transportation department. That's just going to be something we look at. But in the future, this is not best practice to approve things once we've already been underway. So I do apologize to the board for that.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Just a shout out to the transportation department and Randy for all their work over there. And with the way that timing works, getting these pieces all put together with kindergartners being a huge part of transportation. Thank you to them. Mrs. Perry?
And I would also like to comment that this was an impressive document for us to read. It had to take hour upon hour upon hour to do. Very well done.
Either way, I'll echo what you said. Opening day, I'll call it opening day, seeing the buses out there. And then I think people have to realize Mr. Richards was at Washington when they were getting dropped off there, and at Noble when they were getting dropped off as well. Those bus drivers, I think on day one were early. They had smiles on, and those kids just, they do a great job for our students. And so it's good to see them out there.
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Mr. Kizabeth,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes. 7.02 in the same vein. So approve the 2022-2023 school bus stops.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Wonderful. Mrs. Perry?
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Mr. Kizabeth,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes. 7.03 approve the golf contract agreement.
So moved.
Second.
So I also need to make sure that for people that are watching or in the audience, one of the things that I've been working on to make certain with the Board of Education is that we're having individual conversations with board members so that when board members get here, I know there's always a concern that there's a rubber stamping of what things that happen. In good organizations, and this is a smart Board of Education, there's a lot of smart people up here. They've asked questions prior to being up here. So when you hear some of these votes that happen more quickly, it's not just that they are reading this for the first time and then voting. They've had the opportunity to look at this, to be able to ask questions. And I just think that's important for people that are in the audience or watching online to be able to know, because there is that notion of accountability. And the board's job is to provide accountability to Mrs. Perry and myself. And I just think it's important for people to know that the Board of Education, so far from what I've seen, you guys all take your responsibility very seriously to that, and that they have been engaged in that effort to be able to do so. So I just want to make certain, I forgot to say that up front. This is a golf contract. Yet again, this will be the last time I say it, hopefully forever. But this is typically a contract that should have come to the Board of Education prior to first golf matches and practices taking place. But this is for the contract for us to work with Mohawk Golf Club for our student golfers to be able to play their games and practices.
Yeah, and if I may, I think you have been responsive, because this has been an issue in the past that we'd like to make sure that coaches and everything is done ahead of time. And especially in this regard, since our golf team is off to a good start, I think they're surprising themselves even, so cheer on our golf teams.
Mrs. Perry?
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Mr. Kizabeth,
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes. 7.04 approve Wood County Juvenile Detention Center Agreement 22-23.
I'm going to abstain from any discussion.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
This is for any student that we might have that is or could be placed at the Wood County Juvenile Detention Center. People may not understand, we are still required to provide education if they are our students wherever they are placed. And so this is just an agreement to be able to take care of the financial compensation for that.
Thank you. Any other discussion or questions? Mrs. Perry?
Mr. Kizabeth,
Yes.
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Mr. Perez,
Abstain.
Dr. McBride,
Yes. 7.05 approve therapy service agreement for 22-23. We'll entertain a motion and then we'll have Mr. Richards explain.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
This is we have one student that is in Canton, Ohio that requires services. And so this is making sure that, yet again, same as what we had above, that we are able to provide the services for a student that is placed elsewhere.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion? Mrs. Perry?
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Mr. Kizabeth,
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes. 7.06 approve the NCO ESC rent contract for special education unit at Noble.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Richards?
We'd have a unit at Noble Elementary. We contract with the NCOESC. I believe we've done this for a number of years. We do charge them rent for that space as well. It's a modest rent, it's $5,000, but this is making certain that we are able to educate more students from Tiffin inside Tiffin City School District.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion? Mrs. Perry?
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Mr. Kizabeth,
Yes.
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes. 7.07, approve job description. Entertain a
So moved.
Second.
So upon coming here, one of the things that I think we really needed to engage in, and I'm super happy with how this has gone so far, is we definitely need to do a better job of engaging our parents and working with our community. This is such a rich and vibrant community, and it's really an untapped resource in how we can keep working with this as a school. We've taken advantage of that already, but I think there's still a lot more ways that we can grow and improve and to be able to make our district more parent-friendly as we move forward. And so as we look at that, Mrs. Michelle Tewitt seemed like a natural person to be able to fill that role. I've appreciated getting to work with Mrs. Tewitt greatly, and she's truly hit the ground running on this. And I think she's probably sick and tired of me saying each time, oh, we'll have Michelle kind of work on that. In fact, I think she said that today. It's like, you keep adding more and more things to me. But she's a great resource for us as we try to work forward with our community. And I think it's safe to say we've burned some bridges in the past. And so we need to be able to repair some of those bridges to make us stronger as we move forward. And I'm excited to be able to work with Michelle as she works with our different community agencies. The nerdy way of saying it in my educational psychology, Mrs. Kuhn is in charge of Bloom's taxonomy, and Mrs. Tewitt's in charge of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs talks about making sure students are safe, secure, and taken care of. And then Bloom's taxonomy is those higher levels of learning and the knowledge and comprehension and analysis. So I think dividing up those responsibilities between the two of them, I think they're going to provide to be a dynamic duo for our district to help us continue to move forward.
Thank you. Any other discussion or questions?
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Mr. Kizabeth,
Yes.
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes. 7.08 is the next part of that, which is the approve the administrator contract.
So moved.
Second.
And just to clarify, much to probably Mrs. Tewitt's chagrin, this is no increase in pay or anything else like that. The district has also, and I think it's important for people to know and the board is aware, originally we had posted for a director of communications position for at least this year. I will serve as the director of communications because I think that's one of the things that I'd like to focus on how we can better engage with our community and where those issues are that we might need to be able to address. So there's actually a cost savings in this process actually as well.
And I think that you hit the nail on the head with Mrs. Tewitt's skills and also those matching so beautifully with our community needs and her being able to really be that bridge. So I'm excited to see where this goes.
I'd just like to thank Ms. Tewitt for the last few years that I've been on the board. She is, in many regards, the face of our district. People know Ms. Tewitt, the little kids do. And I would say that the public doesn't know some of the things she does behind the scenes during the pandemic. We had some grants, and she stepped up and helped the district along in some very important regards. But I think that's the kind of person she is she steps up where there's a need, and she'll do it even if it's not her job to do that. But I think that's what also makes her valuable is that I think, this keeps her here with us in our district. It was just also at the preschool and got to see that, and she had a big part in that. And I know she's going to continue to stay involved in that. But I think this job or her taking this contract is really going to help out our district through this next transition here. So thank you.
I am very excited for Michelle to take this on because she has so many contacts and she has so many resources and she meets people so well. So I am so pleased, Michelle, that you're going to do this.
Since you brought it up, could you clarify any current or ongoing engagement with the preschool that Mrs. Tewitt will have?
Yeah, one of the things Mrs. Tu and I have talked about, I truly believe in working with Mr. Nadeau, our new special ed, our student services director, who's sitting back there. Um, preschool, the mandate for preschool in a school district is really based upon special education. We are allowed to educate more kids, obviously, that are not on IEP, but the mandate for schools with preschool really centers around special education. And so it just seems more logical to me that preschool would fall underneath the student services domain. Actually, Mrs. Tuitt and Mr. Nadeau were talking to me today, and we're working on a kind of a stronger succession plan. Thanks, Mr. Williams, for putting me on the spot. So that's going to be something that we bring to you. We're working on that today because we do want to make certain our preschool staff is taken care of, and that's more than what one person can handle. In Mr. Nadeau's position, but I really believe, and Mr. Nadeau agrees, that we really need to make sure that what we're doing in our preschool, the genesis of that is making certain we're supporting our kids, our students with disabilities. And so having that organizational structure just makes more sense. And additionally, I'm going to keep Mrs. Tuitt plenty busy. And she has a number of things, and I think the board's correctly alluded to. There's a number of things that she has done just because it needed to be done. Now we're going to formalize that and crystallize that. Instead of those being nice to have things for our district, those are need to have things. And to be able to give her the authority to take that and run with it and kind of make it her own. I've noticed what happens when even in a short period of time, when I've given Michelle a task to do, man, does it get done, and it gets done well. And so I'm excited to see what Michelle can do moving forward. I don't think whatever we're talking about, and hopefully that'll be presented next month for our preschool, that's a stopgap plan for how we plan on using it this year. But we've worked on a plan that we think will be more of a long-term issue because Mr. Nadeau being in charge of preschool and special education and all of those other things is just not a sustainable plan for a long term. But we will hopefully have a plan to the Board of Education next month.
And yeah, this isn't turning into discussion on preschool. I think as a board member, my only expectation is if we continue to run, and we will run that preschool, that it's going to be the best preschool in
Yes.
Tiffin, period. And I think, again, if I remember, and I might be wrong, Michelle stepped into that role too when that happened. And so I think she understands federal grants, she understands all that funding, different, that's something people don't appreciate that you need to have in government and public sector. So.
Yep. Agreed.
Ms. Perry?
Mr. Kizabeth,
Yes.
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Dr. Gase.
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes. 7.09, adopt fiscal year 2023 permanent appropriation resolution.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Richards?
I will turn that over to Mrs. Perry, actually.
As the agenda states, the resolution is exhibited on pages 90 through 92 of your books. This is an annual requirement by the Ohio Revised Code, section 5705.38. And it's when the board sets the legal maximums that we can spend for all of our purposes from all of our different funds during the fiscal year. So on page 91, you can see a list of all of our funds and the amounts that will be legally set aside. None of these can exceed the amount of estimated resources, which would be our carryover balances in each fund, plus the revenue that we expect to receive this year. And all of that has been certified by the Budget Commission. And then I will take these amounts to the county auditor, and she will certify that none of them exceed those amount of resources. So the first one that's listed on page 91 is the general fund. That amount comes from mostly from the 5-year forecast that was adopted in May. We have some specific line item budgets that have fixed amounts that are limited, and the others are all based on the projections in the forecast. That'll be updated in November. If this amount is not sufficient, when I do that forecast, then I'll have to come back to you and ask you to appropriate more money, but I expect that it will be. The amount in the general fund, 11.7 million reflects 75% of our estimated resources. So that means that we will be reserving about $11.4 million that you are not setting aside for expenditures. And that's the equivalent of about 4.5 months of operating expenditures for this year. The 002 bond retirement fund, that sets aside exactly what we need for paying the middle school construction and House Bill 264 energy improvements debt. The 003 permanent improvement, that totals $828,000. That's based on the annual tax budget that was approved back in January. And then I always check that against what my actual expenditures were in fiscal year 2022, which were as expected. Approximately 50% of the estimated resources in this fund are going to remain unappropriated or reserved, which is about $900,000 or 1 year's worth of tax collections in that fund. 034 classroom facilities maintenance. That's the $500,000 levy for this building, and that was part of the bond issue for the construction of this building. That totals $477,400. That's also based on the actual annual tax budget that we prepared back in January. It includes $400,000 for the roof on this building to be replaced. The estimated reserve at the end of this fiscal year, which would be June 30th, 2023, will be about $950,000. And then we will have 1/2 of a year of collection left, and then that levy will expire. So we will only be able to collect about another $80,000, and then we will not receive any more money from that levy. That will expire at the same time that the bond issue does. 006 food service fund. That totals 1.3 million. That's about 65% of its estimated resources, and that will reserve about $700,000, which is about 80% of annual expenditures. All of the other funds that I did not mention, those are funds that revenues are generated for specific, immediate, or temporary purposes. So the state expects those to be expended, not reserved. So 100% of the estimated resources is appropriated in those funds.
Thank you for the
So-
explanation.
Ms. Perry, so is next year the last year that the taxpayer is going to see the levy for the middle school then? January-
Yes,
Okay.
calendar year 2023. So that levy will expire December 31st, 2023.
Any other questions for Mrs. Perry?
Mr. Perez, Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Mr. Kizabeth,
Yes.
Dr. McBride.
Yes. 7.10, approve physical occupational therapy services agreement.
So moved.
Second.
This, along with 7.11, are making sure we're providing supports for our students. And talking with Mr. Nadeau, that might be something that we look at bringing back in-house in the future. But for this year, where we are, we obviously have to provide support services as dictated by a student's IEP to make sure that our students are able to be successful. So that's what we're doing for this year. That'll be something that we may take a look at moving forward.
Thank you. Any other discussion or questions? Mrs. Perry?
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Mr. Kizabeth,
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Dr. McBride.
Yes. 7.11, approve speech language pathology services agreement.
So moved.
Second.
Same as before.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion? Mrs. Perry?
Dr. Gase.
Yes.
Mr. Perez, Mr. Kizabeth,
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Dr. McBride.
Yes. 7.12, approve special education services agreement.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
This is to make certain our students who attend the School of Opportunity are able to do so, which I think so far in what I've been able to see in here is really just a fantastic program for some of our students.
Yes, we have incredible services and an incredible opportunity out there. And it sounds like most of these that we're bringing forward this evening are all making sure that anyone who's getting the services they need in our district, or if they have to be placed outside of our district, we're managing those as well.
Correct.
Thank you. Mrs. Perry?
Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Mr. Kizabeth,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes. 7.13, the resignation of Kelsey Snyder, submitted 8/4/22.
So moved.
Second.
And this is just a pro forma thing that we do for any employee. There's a July 10th deadline in the state of Ohio, and this is a pro forma thing that we have to do when that situation, when employees leave after that July 10th deadline.
Any discussion or questions? Mrs. Do you have a question, Dr. Gase?
No.
Mrs. Perry?
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Mr. Kizabeth,
Yes.
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes. 7.14, approve the teacher serving as administrator MOU.
So move.
Second.
This is what was shared at the last meeting with Mr. Schreiber being the interim athletic director for a year. That's not a commitment after this year, so we wanted to make sure we formalized the fact that if it doesn't work out for him to remain as the athletic director, that his teaching position is still saved for him.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussions on that? Mrs. Perry?
Mr. Kizabeth,
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Yes.
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes. 7.15, approve the casual substitute teacher pay increase.
So moved.
Second.
This is a move that I think is really necessary. We've got far too many teachers and administrators covering classes. And yes, there is compensation for them when they do so, but it still takes away from the work of the district that really needs to be accomplished. Our substitute pay, I think, was very much on the low end. I think 115 puts us competitive. We are not the highest around or anywhere near it, but we are most certainly not the lowest around. So the word choice I would use is I believe that 115 puts us in a competitive position for our substitutes.
Any other questions or discussion? I think this is a wise move to help the district. Thank you. Mrs. Perry?
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Mr. Kizabeth,
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Abstain.
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes. 7.16, approve casual substitute teacher bonus.
So moved.
Second.
In addition to having people substitute, we also need them to really substitute more than one day. And so by making sure we provide a bit of a bonus for people that help us out more regularly, our goal is to hopefully not just have people sub a day or so here and there, but have them serve more regularly. Yet again, that alleviates administrators and teachers having to cover the classes. It hopefully avoids situations where we combine classes and just put them in study hall. Yet again, from a financial standpoint, every time that a teacher is absent and when we have a teacher cover classes, we're actually spending $150 per day. So if we had a substitute teacher even with the increase of 115 with a $150 bonus, that's $15 per day, we are still now at $130 per day when in fact we're actually expending $150 per day without the substitutes. And we're having a decreased amount of work by our administration and teachers in the process. So it's actually, I would make a pretty strong argument that this is actually a fiscal savings for our district and an efficiency as well.
And I think it's a number of things. I think it's fiscal savings. I think it's an efficiency piece, but also I think it lends itself better to a work-life balance for our teachers and administrators, because if they're losing their planning period, that it's got to get done somewhere. But also I think that it allows us to be more preventative and less reactionary. So I appreciate it on all fronts. Any other discussion or questions? Mrs. Perry?
Dr. Gase,
Yes.
Mr. Perez,
Yes.
Mr. Kizabeth,
Yes.
Mr. Williams,
Abstain.
Dr. McBride.
Yes. This brings us down to the opportunity for the public to dialogue with the board. So this opportunity to discuss issues and or policy or programming, not to be argumentative or to discuss personnel. This dialogue will last for no more than 30 minutes, but may be extended at the discretion of the board. Seeing none, we will move on to board discussion. There are a few things that I think would be great to discuss, and I think you brought up one, Mr. Richards, already, which is how we've already started restructuring and reformatting things, which I think on my end has been really helpful as a board member, but I do want the public to be aware that we are now meeting regularly with you, going over all agenda items in small groups.
In small groups, so we are not in violation of the Sunshine Law.
Correct. So all in small groups and not making any decisions, but being able to do some of that work and keeping us all accountable so that we come to board meetings prepared. So I have appreciated that reformatting. Thoughts on that?
Well, I kind of like it. I think when you said, one of the things I said is I don't want my kids having to sit there with a poor person that's substituting them in a study hall joint. I think it's being receptive to some of the questions we might have in a way that he's able to address them before we get here, or answer our questions so that we look prepared, and we are prepared. So I kind of like that. It does take a lot of our time, though, but I think we're all eager for that.
But I was actually doing some of the time equations last week. It takes more of our time during the week before or the 2 weeks before a board meeting, but it also helps to abbreviate the amount of time that we have everybody here, and that's staff, that's admin, that's all the personnel, and so I think that's also being more respectful of their time because it's kind of what we signed up for.
It all starts with communication, and that's really important.
Another nod that I wanted to give is last week you shared with us a chart of opening days and where each building, but not just each building, also transportation, food service, the key things that are getting going those first days. And you had created a schedule of which administrators were going to be at each building, and they were rotating. And I just happened to pop in Mr. Bowe's office, I don't remember what day, and I said, that was really cool. I'm sure you do that every year. And he said, we haven't. So seeing that and the intentionality of being present and being in all of the buildings and having all of central staff there and supportive, thank you for that. I guess those weren't really discussion topics so much as points of topic. Any other discussion topics?
Can I just use this for general shout outs or no? Okay, so the name I couldn't remember was Trevor Blodgett. It came into my head. His sister was still on track, so I'll probably still see her if she comes back this spring. And I couldn't forget Jory Fawcett and Elena Hayes, who were also on there for our student members. But you mentioned the DD, School of Opportunity. Wednesday, they're having their opening of their park, their dedication. I think some of us helped to scrape up the stuff and move it out so they could put the new park in. Girls tennis was playing right now. They're 6-1, just beat Fremont. And everybody knows, our football team started off Friday as well. Girls soccer is on its way. Cross country starts tomorrow. And as I told you before, golf is actually off surprising themselves with their start this year. But in terms of the opening, convocation, I think lots of people were pressing your chart that reminded everyone that the focus of our district is our students, our children, and that's what it all revolves around. They're at the center of everything, and it was good to see everybody back in the buildings. So.
Yeah, I just wanted the support services at the very end of it. I don't think you reported it, but there was a report about the tennis courts. In case that tennis courts are going to remain in the same location, but going to be redone next spring.
You're right, apologies. So the tennis courts are going to stay in the same spot, and plans are being made to start the work in the spring, summer of 2023.
Will we miss any, the ability to have any activities at that facility?
As it stands right now, and I'm working with Mr. Daniel on that, most likely because of activities that the repairs would take place this summer, so there wouldn't be a loss of activity for any of the students.
And I think Coach Weingart said we weren't certain, or maybe it was Scotty said we weren't certain about the spring after
Correct.
winter. to see
So
what happens.
with the boys that play in the spring, we're going to have to wait through the winter to see what type of freeze thaw, how that affects the courts. Right now, they're not great, but they are playable. Our hope will be, fingers crossed, that the winter is cooperative to us so that they can remain that way, so that we would be able to play on them in the spring. If they're not playable in the spring, we can probably get going on those repairs even faster then. But we didn't want to have to put off the kids. If those courts are playable, we'd like for them to be able to play at their home courts where they're a little bit more comfortable.
Thank you.
What's the backup plan?
We'll tell you that once we get through the winter. We will anticipate positive thoughts, and if we have to look for a backup plan, we will work on that. But we will put out a little hope to make certain that those courts are going to be playable for the spring.
So you'll be calling us all to go out there with hair dryers to keep it warm so it
Yes,
doesn't
yes.
freeze?
So bring
Okay,
out hair
perfect.
dryers in whatever ways, but we'll hope for a mild winter. However, I've read on the Farmer's Almanac that that's not in the forecast for this year. So we'll see how that goes.
So it could be useful if, following the Farmer's Almanac to already have some preliminary discussions for
Yes.
where to play in the spring.
Yes.
Perfect. Any other discussion topics? Mr. Wortham says no. Mr. Perez says no. All right, that concludes board discussion. We do not have executive session tonight. So then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Mrs. Perry?
Dr. Gase?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Kizabeth?
Yes.
Mr. Perez?
Yes.
Dr. McBride?
Yes, thank you all of those for your attending. Our next regular board meeting will be September 26th, 2022, 6:30 p.m. here.